Now, John, we're in the Grand Temple. So if you can explain, if you'd like to, what actually takes place in here.
This is where Grand Lodge meets. Grand Lodge is the governing body of English Freemasonry. It's a representative body of all the members, and like all organisations, we have a rule book and financial affairs to run, and that's all done in Grand Lodge, which meets 4 times a year. But it's also used for other major Masonic meetings when we have a large number of people, because the room will seat up to 1,700 people. But increasingly in the last 10 years, we've been using it for other purposes. We have films, people coming in. A lot of people will know the outside of the building from the BBC series Spooks.
Oh, yes.
We've had the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, part of that was filmed in here. We've recently had Matt Damon in filming a new film about the Iraq War, and Guy Ritchie doing part of his new film about Sherlock Holmes. Fashion shows, concerts, all sorts of receptions and presentations.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's very much a working building, not just for Freemasonry, and it gives the lie a little to this whole idea of Freemasonry being very secretive.
Well, exactly. So everybody says, oh, Freemasons, that's secret society. But it doesn't sound that secret if you have people coming in doing fashion shows and filming, because I believe you had Sharon Stone here.
We've had Sharon Stone, Matt Damon, Rowan Atkinson when he did his Johnny English film, all sorts of people like that.
So as you say, it is a working building, so it does dispel the myth of it being as secret as people think. Now, we're sitting on this carpet. If you could just explain a little bit about the symbolism behind the black and white checky carpet.
It has, there for 2 reasons. One is the link back to King Solomon's Temple again, where the flooring of the temple and the Holy of Holies was said to be black and white squares, but it's also got a symbolic meaning. It represents the light and shade of life, the good and the bad that you're likely to come up against through your passage through life.
Okay. Now, all around this room, especially the ceiling, we'll have to take some shots so we can look up to that. But there's so many different things within the mosaics. We have I believe that's George and the Dragon.
St George and the Dragon representing England, because we're the United Grand Lodge of England. And on the other side you've got Helios, the sun, in his chariot, taking the sun from the east to the west, representing the day. At the west end you've got Euclid and Pythagoras, who were the basis of geometry, the basis of architecture. And above the main throne, you've got King Solomon himself, Hiram, King of Tyre, who provided a lot of the material, and the ladder with representations of faith, hope, and charity, leading you up to God himself. In the corners, you've got the 4 cardinal virtues: prudence, fortitude, temperance, and justice, which are how we expect our people to operate, with prudence, temperance, and fortitude and justice.
So when was this room built?
This was built, the whole building was built between 1927 and it was officially opened in 1933.
Is that how long it actually took
It took 5 years to do it. It's not exactly a small building, it's 2.25 acres, the main site, and about 11.5 acres of floors on the various floors.
Because looking up at the ceiling, you would think it was a painting, but it's not. These are...
No, it's a mosaic.
Individual
They brought a group of mosaic artists over from North Italy, where they're famous for it, and they spent about 7 months on scaffolding up there doing it all.
It's like the Sistine Chapel in a sense, isn't it? So they must have all been lying on their backs looking up. If you can just explain the star at the top.
The ceiling is the sky, the canopy of heaven, which covers over everything, and the star is one of the major stars. It's a bit of an engineering feat in itself. It comes down on a hydraulic pulley and covers the whole of the centre of the floor when it comes out. It's huge, because it's about 60 feet up there.
So it comes down. Why does it come down?
I've changed the light bulbs.
That's simple.
Simple as that. You've got to change the light bulbs and it gets cleaned every so often.
I guess so. And in each corner are there shields?
Yes, they are the arms of Grand Lodge, which were adopted in the 18th century. We were given a grant of arms by the College of Heralds in 1919. And you get them in the ceiling and over the four corner doors.
It's absolutely amazing. Now, what am I missing? There's a great big organ up here.
A wonderful organ designed by Henry Willis for the building, a superb instrument. And the room can quite happily vibrate if the grand organist lets rip on it.
Everyone's singing in a good tune, you might say. And again, we have stained glass windows. Is there any symbolism behind those?
That's light. Mm-hmm. The rays of light coming down. And then, of course, you have, rather like the old guilds and livery companies, a lodge and Grand Lodge. They're ruled by a master and two wardens, or in Grand Lodge, Grand Master and Grand Warden. So you have the Grand Master's chair, and he's supported by a deputy and an assistant, and the senior and junior Grand Wardens in the west and south of the room. So
how often do the Grand Masters meet with ceremony on the big occasions?
The big occasions. Grand Lodge meets 4 times a year to carry out any changes and policy decisions. And then at the end of April we have the annual investiture, when the Grand Master appoints his Grand Officers, national officers, to help him during the next year carry out things all around the country. It's also used by, outside London, lodges are grouped in provinces, which are based roughly on the old counties, and the home counties provinces hold their annual meeting here. And any sort of major Masonic celebrations we would do in here. We recently consecrated a new lodge to meet in London, and there were about 750 people wanted to attend, so the constitution ceremony for that new lodge took place in this room.
So how many people can be seated in here at one time?
I think the fire officer allows us 1,700.
Okay, that's quite a lot then. So I guess when people come here and they're all dressed up in their regalia, for want of better words, I bet it's quite spectacular.
It's a fantastic side. It's a typical example of good British pageantry.
I was going to say, all chaps together,
yes,
and ladies?
On occasions, we've had ladies who've come to address Grand Lodge. Of course, non-Masonic events that take place, very much a mixed audience. But on particularly something like the annual investiture in April, it's still, after 30 years of attending it, when you see it and you come in and everybody's sitting in their dark blue collars of office and apron. The Grand Officers of the year wear their chains of office, and we have a group called Grand Stewards who do the arrangements for the banquet after the meeting, and they wear scarlet, and it's very colourful and typical sort of English pageantry.
Must be a wonderful feeling of camaraderie, I guess.
There is, and I think that's one of the strengths. People quite often say, "No, how has Freemasonry gone on for so long, and how are so many?" United Grand Lodge of England, we've got about 255,000 members in England and Wales, and that is very much part of it. It's we seem to live in a very isolationist world these days, and all sorts of old associations are having problems and disappearing. But Freemasonry provides this sort of camaraderie and a bonding through the ceremonies, and I think that's one of its strengths these days.
Well, I was going to say, do you think Freemasonry today is going from strength to strength, or is it keeping on what you would call an even plateau?
We like most voluntary organisation membership organisations, we went through a pretty tough period in the late 70s, 80s and 90s, when the country as a whole had a lot of economic problems, things like that. There was also a generation which weren't joiners of things. But we seem to have come through that, and certainly the last 2 or 3 years we seem to have bottomed out on the membership, and in a number of areas, surprisingly the rural areas rather than cities and metropolitan areas, it's on the rise again.
That's really interesting, actually.
Well, I think it's we went through a period where things like church organisations, Rotary, Round Table, things like that, they'd been going through the same sort of problems, and in a lot of areas have disappeared, whereas Freemasonry didn't have such a great effect, and people are seeing it, particularly now that we've gone back to the business of being much more in the public view, and they see it as an organisation which does good in the community, and for a lot of people it provides them a social life.
Exactly, yes, because I suppose there's always functions going on to attend to. Now the Freemasons, they do a lot of work for charities, but from what I've read from my studies, once upon a time there were hard and fast rules, and if a Freemason broke them, there was some kind of, I don't know if punishment is the right word, but they were brought back into line. But I think you've mellowed a little bit on your rules.
We're very strict on people breaking the law or breaking our rules and principles. I mean, anybody misusing a membership, anybody who, if you're convicted of a criminal offence, then once the law has dealt with you and that process has gone through, you will come up into Masonic discipline procedures, and if you've had a custodial sentence, that's it, your membership is ended. And
there's no exceptions?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all. It goes back to the whole business of the basis in morality and high standards. And if you can't keep those high standards, then you can't be a member of the club, as it were.
Now you've been a Freemason member for quite some time.
Coming up for 39 years.
That's quite some time, so you must enjoy it here.
I do, and it's one of the things which in the last few years, journalists sort of say, well, you know, if it's the same ceremonies, if you don't get anything out of it in a material sense, to which I would say, well, why do you have to get a material benefit out of something? He said, no, why do you? I said, because we enjoy it.
Exactly.
It is the same basic ceremony each time, but you've got a different group of people doing it, you've got a new member going through it. That makes a difference. And I've been incredibly lucky working at the centre. I've been to all sorts of places, met all sorts of people that I couldn't imagine I would have done in any other sort of walk of life. And the fascinating thing about it is I've done quite a bit of travelling, speaking about Freemasonry abroad, and I think what encapsulates it is that I can fly somewhere, be met at an airport by whoever's going to look after me to whichever Masonic group I'm going to. I'm usually being put up in a hotel, but instead of being taken straight to the hotel, I'll be taken to somebody's home for a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or something. Yes. And I can think of very few organisations where there's that sort of level of trust between people who haven't met. I mean, we'd always spoke to each other on the phone, we'd emailed each other to set things up, but we'd never actually met. But there is that sort of level of trust between that you're very happy to invite them into your home.
Now, before someone becomes a Freemason, as we discussed earlier, they go through a vetting procedure. What if someone wants to come out of Freemasonry? What happens in that sense? Are they just free to leave?
Quite easy, yeah.
How do they not become a Freemason?
It's quite simple. If for whatever reason, Freemasonry is not to everybody's taste. There are those who don't enjoy it, and they just simply write to their lodge and say, sorry, not for me. Occasionally, if somebody falls on hard times, they resign from their lodge. And you just simply write to your lodge secretary and say, sorry, as of this date, I'm resigning from the lodge. If, for whatever reason, you want to completely sever your relationship with Freemasonry, you simply write into the Grand Secretary, our Chief Executive, and there's a form you fill out which says you no longer wish to be considered to be a Freemason.
Do you find that many people want to leave, or is it just the odd few?
It's the odd few, and quite often it's because their proposer and seconder haven't talked to them enough about it to find out, and they've either joined for the wrong reasons, or literally, it happened to one of my cousins. He joined because it was a family thing, and his father and his brothers were involved, and he decided it wasn't for him.
So maybe sometime along the line, not with everybody, but there's a little bit of peer pressure, and then they find it's just not their cup of tea.
Oh, that's something which I one, over a few times over the years, I've had friends who've got over-enthusiastic about their Freemason. They've been trying to, and I said, no, you don't push. You just let them make their own mind up.
Absolutely.
Because they should come in of their own wish, not to please somebody else.
Try before you buy. Exactly. What is the age range of a person who can join to become a Freemason?
Traditionally, 21 is the youngest, but you can, by what we call dispensation, be initiated under 21, and that's happening a lot at the moment. We've got a series of lodges which are attached to universities around the country. I mean, the two eldest are at Oxford and Cambridge, and they, obviously, undergraduates are under 21, so they can initiate people who are under 21 and get them through the process whilst they're still at the university. But the age range is anything from 18 until, actually, I think probably the oldest died in the last couple of days.
Right, I think we're going to go on and we're going to look at some other rooms, yes, which would be fantastic. So let's go on our journey.
Fine.
Thank you. Good. We've come to the Indian temple, or is it the Egyptian temple?
Officially, it's rather banally called Lodge Room Number 10,
okay.
But because of the architecture, I think particularly the dome, there's been a tradition of calling it the Indian temple, which I've always found very strange because the decoration is much more Egyptian.
Well, I would have thought that myself, actually, looking around at the stripes and the colours. It really is the golds and the blues.
It is, and the columns particularly look very much like when you see the Egyptian temples. It is very much that style of thing, but there was a suggestion when the building was being planned that if lodges in a particular area contributed to the thing, that rooms would be named after them. And only 3 areas did. Buckinghamshire here, and at that stage in the 1920s and 30s, we had lodges out in Japan and Burma. And the lodges in Japan and Burma contributed the maximum, so there are 2 rooms on, which are rather plain, on the floor above this, which were known as the Japan and the Burma rooms. So everybody used to insist, no, this is Lodge Room Number 10, but you can't stop people doing it. And most people say, oh, the Indian temple.
Yes. So it's not just that people who are Indian will come into this temple. It's a real mixture, but it's just dedicated.
It's just people think, oh, this looks Indian. It's the Indian room.
Yes. If you can explain about the temples, the pillars.
Yeah. The pillars come in 2 ways in Freemasonry. You have the 2 pillars, which the ones at either end and
yes,
here, which there were supposedly 2 pillars outside the entrance to King Solomon's temple. Then you've got 3 others, which are of the Doric, Corinthian and Ionic orders of architecture, which you find at the master and the warden's pedestals. They represent wisdom, strength and beauty. Wisdom, King Solomon.
Yes.
Strength, King Hiram, who produced the material for the building of the temple. And beauty, Hiram Abiff, who was the third of the legendary original Grand Masters, because he was the architect and the designer. But it also represents the wisdom and strength and beauty that you find through life.
It is absolutely a remarkable building. I mean, in the centre of London, people wouldn't even know this really existed till they came inside.
No, when I first started working here in the early 1970s, one or 2 of my friends from university and people from where I worked in the northeast before who came down to London, and they'd say, well, we've been through Covent Garden area before, and of course we've seen this, but we just assumed it was a government building or something like that, because it is rather stark on the outside.
And now they think it's the Spooks building.
Now they think it's the Spooks building, and that goes back to secrecy again. One of the things that really tickled me recently was a friend of mine said to me, had I seen the MI5 website? I didn't know where MI5 had a website.
There's an MI5?
There is an MI5 website. And I said, no. He said, oh, you're mentioned on it. and they've got a picture of the tower entrance, which is supposed to be the MI5 entrance in Spooks.
Okay.
And there's a little bit under the front saying, this is not Thames House, this is the Freemasons Hall in Covent Garden. Thames House is not open to the public, the Freemasons Hall in Covent Garden is.
But this isn't Covent Garden, is it?
We're just on the edge.
Oh, we're just on the edge,
Yeah.
right. Okay, because I think of the markets when I think
Yes.
of Covent Garden,
No.
so we are literally on the edge of it. Now this is dissected, well, really into three. There's no pillars over here. Why is that?
Just the architect's fancy.
Because normally everything is north, south, east, west.
Yes, in the tradition of all sorts of temples, they were usually on an east-west axis. So figuratively, where the masters sit is in the east, and that goes back to the business of knowledge and learning was supposed to have originally come from the east.
Oh, right, okay.
So that the senior warden's in the west, the junior warden in the south. And that's the standard configuration wherever you go around this country. Although the architecture might be different, the lodge room will be set up in the same way, with the master and the wardens in those positions. In London, the secretary and the treasurer tend to sit at the desk. In other places, they might be in different areas. But same basic layout wherever you go.
Well, you say knowledge originally comes from the east. Which part in particular?
It's a sort of very general east. That there was this idea in the late 1600s, the 1700s, when they were beginning to physically discover more of the world, let alone start thinking about ideas. And that there was this idea because classical times, Greece, and the Greek philosophers.
As we've seen, Pythagoras
Exactly,
and the other
Pythagoras
one,
and
yes.
Euclid. Then before that, it was supposed to be in Egypt, and where all the learning was, and where the original mystery religions were. And of course, they didn't know much beyond that. They knew there was stuff beyond that, but they didn't know. So, for the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries, the East was that area of the sort of Western Mediterranean,
Right.
down to the Gulf area, and that was where knowledge and learning were supposed to have started and developed.
In your opinion, where do you think really the first knowledge came from of esoteric subjects?
I think it's been with us since man started to communicate. Men started to communicate with each other. So mankind started to communicate with each other.
As in cavemen? But where did we make that leap? Because we have ancient Egypt with the fantastic architecture of the pyramids, and then it didn't really seem to further on from that, and it's kind of stopped, and then we went a bit primitive. So how did it all kick off again?
I think it goes through that way, and you get parallel things happening in South America with the Maya and the Aztecs.
Oh, okay.
Examples of stuff that they're finding now in Australasia, stuff that they're finding now in China, where and you're right, there is this sort of curious thing that you get a civilization and a particular way of thinking and particular ideas, and then they seem to disappear, and then it crops up again somewhere else. And the interesting thing to me is, if, as all sorts of people project at the moment, we're going to disappear in the next 50 or 60 years,
Yes.
Where's it going to come up from again?
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, we touched before on the architecture of the pyramids. Why do you believe the pyramids were built? What was their main function?
Personally, as burial chambers, monuments.
That's what you believe.
Yeah.
It's a big building, isn't it, just for a burial chamber?
I would imagine, sort of trying to think back into the times, if you were Pharaoh, you had a fairly heavy ego and you would want to be remembered.
But there are pyramid structures, not just in Egypt, but around the world.
Oh, there are. There was something I saw recently where they were trying to make a relationship between a lot of the stuff that's being rediscovered in South America, where they have pyramid structures again.
Yes.
There are examples apparently in India. I don't know whether they found anything any further east, I think it in a sense, it's a bit like the Tower of Babel in the Bible. It's trying to give a physical idea of this idea of reaching up, and trying to reach up.
A stairway to heaven.
Stairway to heaven, yes.
As in the song. Do you believe that the Aztecs built their pyramids as burial chambers?
I have no idea. It's an area I've not yet looked into.
A bit more studying on that part.
A bit more studying.
If you can tell us anything else about this room and the functions, if you can.
It's used for lodge meetings, and that will be anything from the 3 ceremonies by which you become a Master Mason, and then once a year each lodge, the Master of the Lodge changes every year, and his officers who help him with the ceremonial during the year. So once a year they will hold the installation ceremony for the new Master, and he will appoint his officers. And this actual room has, rather like the Grand Temple where we were earlier, has also been used. It was actually used in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And wonderful scene where John Malkovich is running down, apparently on metal legs, down a structure down in the middle. But it's used on a almost daily basis during the Masonic season from September till June. Because as well as being the national headquarters for English Freemasonry, we are also the principal meeting place for lodges in London.
Okay.
So the main entrance hall from about 4 o'clock onwards is a bit like one of the mainline stations. People coming in out to their meetings.
John, you've brought us to this wonderful area, which is the museum. And there seems to be things from all over the world. If you could just tell us a little bit about the collection.
We've been very lucky over the years. Members and members of the public have been very generous and donated stuff. And it's quite an amazing collection because,
it certainly is.
As well as the normal thing that, like regalia and the medals that Freemasons wear, it's part of what we were saying a little earlier about Freemasonry having been very public for most of its existence. And in the 18th century, from about the 1750s, enterprising glass and porcelain manufacturers and people who made domestic wares suddenly found they had a new market. And you get all sorts of things like glass and pots and things like warming pans for beds and fire grates and all sorts of things with Masonic decoration on them.
I can see that actually. I mean, this piece is amazing, isn't it?
The punch bowl is fantastic. That came from...
That's a punch bowl.
It's a punch bowl. And it was a lodge in India, meeting in Calcutta, and in 1813 they commissioned somebody in China to make that. It's Chinese porcelain and put Masonic decoration on it. And they had the most incredible recipe for punch involving various spirits and soda and things like that, and a secret recipe of Indian herbs and spices.
So you haven't got it, you can't share it.
There is somebody still, because the lodge came back to this country in the 1970s, and there is somebody in the lodge that has the recipe.
Well, let me know when you have a party. Fill up the punch bowl.
But,
what else can you show us around here?
We were talking earlier on about famous Freemasons, and here we've got Winston Churchill, who was the wartime Prime Minister, was a Freemason in the very early part. His apron and the little pouch he kept it in. And this is someone who I had the privilege of meeting. It was a Lieutenant Commander Tommy Gould, who was one of the Navy men who won a VC in the last war. And he was very involved in Freemasonry, his Master Mason's apron. And I think going on from the VC, I think one of the rather more emotional displays in the museum, an enormous amount of activity amongst prisoners of war from the wars against Napoleon in the late 18th century right the way through to the Second World War. And you've got examples of things here. These are officers' emblems, which they would have worn on their collars. They were made out of metal in one of the Japanese prisoner of war camps. And I remember talking to somebody who had been there, And I said, well, wasn't it dangerous? He said, oh yes, if we'd been caught doing anything, or caught with any of this on our person, we'd have been shot instantly. I said, well, why did you do it? And they said, well, it was the one way that we kept sane in the camp, and on it also happened on the Burma Railroad. And they said that kept us sane. Some people used to try to remember poetry, some people tried to remember the Bible. We used to practice our Masonic ritual, and that kept us going. And
what do you know about Masons being taken to the gas chambers when they were found out to be Masons during the war?
An enormous number disappeared. Nobody has an idea of the total, but every time that the Nazis moved into and took over a different country when the war started, the first thing they did was to round up a lot of Freemasons and seize their property. And we know
that wasn't just Jews; that was just Freemasons.
They were just Freemasons, and the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge in Holland died in Sachsenhausen concentration camp, and the only reason he was there was he had been the Grand Master. The French estimate something like 40,000 French Freemasons disappeared into labour camps and concentration camps, and were never seen again.
Why do you think that was?
Oh, it's Hitler had this idea of there being this sort of Jewish Masonic communist conspiracy to take over the world, and it wasn't just he. It was something that was happening in the late 19th, early 20th century, and during the First World War, this idea, crazy idea, grew up. I mean, communists don't like Freemasonry either. But
well, you've said before, it's all about freedom of thought and expression, isn't it?
It is.
And anything where that's involved, that seems to be happening today again, doesn't it? Or
it is. It's one of. Somebody said to me recently, did I think Freemasonry was still relevant in the 21st century? And I said I think it's actually more relevant now than it has been since its earliest days, because society is getting very selfish. It's a sort of me society. We're getting more and more interference in what we do. A lot of our freedoms are being interfered with. And the whole basis of this idea of society and fraternalism, of tolerance, and honesty and morality are very important.
Now, First and Second World Wars, people fought for their freedom, and Hitler did try to bring in, I don't know if he did bring in identity cards. I think he did.
Oh, I think
was on the verge of doing that. And that is exactly what is being done today. I mean, what do you think about that?
As an individual, I don't like it at all. But one of the things that, speaking as a Freemason, which I am doing at the moment, you'll find that Freemasonry as an organisation and individual Freemasons, we don't make comments on what is going on. It's all part of this business of no politics, no religion. We know that's dividing. So that as an individual, I have my own views, but as a Freemason, I wouldn't express them. And it's like people often say, what does Freemasonry do for society? Freemasonry in itself and as an organisation doesn't do anything. It's the effect that Freemasonry and its principles and its rules have on the individual, and they carrying that out in their lives, then that obviously affects the way they react in society and in the community, and it has an effect through the individual. But Freemasonry, it's not a lobby group, it's not a political party. It doesn't give, as we say in our basic principle, it doesn't give an opinion on state or government policy.
Well, I suppose because you have so many people from different backgrounds,
that's exactly
it must be very difficult to meet on a common ground as such. But as you say, your principles are the same for freedom and justice.
Yes, it is.
Absolutely.
This is how the Master's Place would have been set up in the 18th century, where there was some wonderful 18th century furniture still survives. It's the Master's chair.
That is a spectacular piece, isn't it?
And again, you've got the two columns, and then in the sunburst at the top,
yes,
you've got the square, the set square, which is the master's emblem of office, which he would wear on his collar. The pedestal, you've got the Bible, or as we would call it, the volume of the sacred law, because that has to always be open, present and open at a meeting. But obviously, to a Hindu or a Parsi, it's not their sacred volume. So if a candidate came who was a Muslim, a Parsi or Hindu, they would use their holy book, which would also go on the pedestal. But as we are basically still a Christian country, the Bible would always stay there. And on it again you have the best known Masonic symbols, the square and the compasses, and the Master's light, and either side of the chair two rather splendid columns with again the terrestrial and the celestial globes, pointing out that Freemasonry is universal, and it's here the candidate would take his obligation as a Freemason, his serious promise to uphold the principles of Freemasonry, and would be instructed in the duties and principles by the Master. This is one of the more spectacular museum pieces. Augustus Frederick, Duke of Sussex, one of the sons of King George III, was our Grand Master from 1813 till his death in 1843. And for his 25th anniversary, they decided to get up a subscription to give him a present. And Garrard's, the Crown Jewellers, made this. It's a table centerpiece for a dining table, quite a dozen size of a dining table.
It is, isn't it?
It's 2,002 ounces of pure silver. And again, you've got geometry, geography. You've got the idea of a temple, the pillars again, the sun on the top, and the pedestal with the Bible and the square and compasses on it.
It's absolutely incredible. Well, John, we just want to say thank you very much for taking us all around this, well, not all of the building, because I'm sure there's nooks and crannies that we can't explore, but we really want to thank you so much for all of your time today and showing us around this fabulous museum. And I do hope that we can come back in the future and add a little bit more to this programme that we've done, and I hope that you've enjoyed having us too.
It's been a pleasure to have you, and I hope it might stimulate anybody who sees the programme to come in, because we are open to the public.
Yes, I mean, if you just want to say a few words about how people can come on the tours and have a look around here.
It's where we're open Monday to Friday from 10 till 5, and provided the Grand Temple is not in use, we do tours at 11, 12, 2, 3 and 4 from the Library and Museum, and you simply turn up, register with the front desk and come up. If you want to come in and use the Library and Museum, they're open again. Saturdays we have an official conducted tour, which is always pre-arranged, but any other time, come in and see us and just have a wander around. And
yeah, so as I say, people don't realise that you can come in, but they can. But thank you so much for having us today. It's been absolutely fantastic. We've loved it. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Cheers.